Okay class, welcome back to the watercolor technique demo. Last class we learned about washes. Can you name the 3 washes we learned? Flat, graded, and gradient. Right. We learned about resist techniques and ways to lift the paint. I wanted to touch on resist again before we moved on to today's techniques. If you are using crayons, you can actually color in the shapes you make, like in these examples. You can also use colored crayons to outline what you are painting. Today, I'm going to teach you a few more resist techniques that you can use after you put your paint down. Remember last class, we applied those techniques before we painted? Let's put down our paint in a new way. Let's learn how to do wet and wet. Your boards do not need to be tilted for the techniques we are using today. So if you still have a book or a stack of newspapers under your board, remove that now. We are also going to switch to using our round brush today. Last class, we only used our flat brush. Today, we will be using the round one. For wet and wet, we apply wet paint on wet paper. Last class, we applied wet paint onto dry paper, making it wet on dry. First step, take a brush to your clean water and wet your area you would like to paint. We will be wetting the entire shape. Apply the water quickly and evenly, brushing from side to side like you did for your washes. I have made this video in one go, and I've broken it up for the 2 days, so I still have the colors from my washes here that are wet. You can also just activate the colors in your watercolor pans for this. Taking a very wet colored brush, touch your paint to the wet shape and let the color bleed. You can keep doing this with the same color or add in new colors like I am. It creates this really interesting tie-dye effect. Again, cleaning the brush as you reach for new colors. Pause the video and give the wet and wet a try. Awesome. Label that wet and wet shape, and then why don't we practice that again, and I will show you those other resistance techniques I promised to show you. I'm glad I have this really big shape left. Going to wet my area first, really wet this time. Let's see how this works out. And I'm going to paint directly from my pan this time when I use my yellow, still wetting it with clean water, of course. Okay, things are getting too wet. I'm going to lift some water with a tissue and add more saturated paint. Let's make those yellows more pigmented, like the orange and teal. I may have added too much water. Going to gently blot again to lift some of it up. My resist techniques that I will show you in a moment might not stay, but you'll get the idea. Lesson learned, don't add too much water. Okay, first resist technique I'm going to apply to my wet paint is rubbing alcohol. I'm going to use a Q-tip to dot the liquid onto my shape. Do you see what is happening? It is pushing the paint away. I am not taking away the liquid, I am adding a liquid, rubbing alcohol, which reacts with my paint and pushes it away, creating these really cool dots. Since my shape is really wet, the paint is probably going to pull back into these spots, but that's okay. Next is salt. I'm going to sprinkle the salt onto my wet paint. The salt soaks up the paint. While the salt crystals get darker, the area around them gets lighter because the salt has soaked up that wet watercolor. Here are a few close-ups of other salted watercolors. I wanted to make my piece more interesting, so I used a sponge to lift up some of the watercolor from my paint. I ended up lifting the paint and pressing it into other places. I am now using something other than a brush to paint with, by stamping the color. This is actually a whole nother technique. What other materials could I try stamping with? Maybe a leaf or a feather? I really had fun with the rubbing alcohol, so I'm going back in to do that more. Pause the video here and do your second wet and wet with resistant techniques. Round 2. And if you also want to practice painting through stamping with various materials, do that now too. You don't have to do it on your wet and wet shapes. It might come out better if the paint is dry. Or maybe it won't. Test it out. Now is the time to play. Now I know all of your shapes are colored in, but we're still not done, artists. We still have to do dry brush. I'm going to clean my round brush off and wet this dark purple just enough to activate it. I will dab off some extra water on scrap paper or on a rag. Then I can use this technique to paint like I would with any other paint. I'm going to add mountains to the bottom of my gradient wash. I had too much water on my dry brush, so I'm going to lift it and try that again. There we go, a nice little mountain range. It kind of looks like the sun is setting behind my mountains, and I want to add some stars in my sky. I'm going to clean off my brush, activate my white paint, and then hold my brush over the sky like so. I am going to spatter the paint by holding the brush with one hand and lightly tapping it with the other, gently, in this case with only one finger, allowing the paint to be flicked into the sky. Now artists, be respectful of your neighbors. Do not spatter with all your strength and get paint onto your classmates' work. Remember, be mindful and respectful of others and their work. That looks really cool, except I got stars on my mountains. No worries, I will let them dry a little and then go back in with my dark purple to paint over them like so. You can use smaller brushes and flick the tip to get smaller spatters as well. You can also use a toothbrush. Pause the video here and use dry brush to paint in one of your shapes. Make sure the shape is dry so your paint does not bleed. Final step. Let's remove that resist material from my graded wash resist shape. Oops, I never labeled mine. That looks awesome. And after you turn it in, we will remove the label tape together, and it will look something like this. Remember, tape is just another resist material that we used. I will be passing out packets with everything we just went over, materials, techniques, and new vocabulary to help you during our exploration of watercolors. I challenge you all to try new materials and techniques, and then record your findings in your sketchbooks, and then share them with the class. More ideas will make your freedom scenes that much cooler. You all did an awesome job, artists. In the next demo, we will be learning how to construct our scenes with silhouettes, and I will give you ideas on how to build your settings using new techniques like foreground and background. But that's another day. Until next time.